That's very, you can't forget, you know, a Raven. He's a realtor here in Ohio.
Does she work for Courtney?
She said we talked. Remember maybe talking to her when I was in Florida?
Um,
And she sent me a text and she sent me a text this morning. She spelled my name correctly even. So that's, and when she answered, I was waiting for an answer. She, uh,
voice message to see who she's with.
well, no, but I was thinking, because she's like, hello? Hello? Yeah. Hey, Glenn, how you doing? So she even knew who I was when I called. But I don't know.
I'm not pulling up just Raven isn't coming up in, oh, wait. Raven, Renee, Dallas. Raven and more Harris, then Ashley,
And see, it's kind of confusing for
Travis.
you want to get it done. Okay, you're gonna be selling it for rent. And I'm not really sure which one. There's gonna be a stupid lockbox on it. I'll have to come over and let you in every time.
And let you what?
Yeah. I think I'm gonna call a lockbox. Well, I think that's the I'll pick it from you if you want. I'm going out there with you. Have whatever works for you. That's gonna make your life pretty freaking miserable. Isn't it? You gotta meet the painters out there, the cleaners. But either way,
There's 2 Ravens in Travis County in Truck.
I'll find it. I'll get it for you.
Guys, Evan, do you know if we're expecting Marty?
There you go. Yeah, she knows about it. I know she's driving to Midland, but she accepted the invitation this morning. So
Oh, got it.
okay. Yeah,
Um,
I can text her real quick and tell her to hop on it.
has she explained a contract yet or sat through one of my classes on explaining a contract?
She has sat through my teaching of the contract, and then after our meeting Monday, I told her that she needed to recite it back to me, and we just haven't been able to get to it between then and now. So she hasn't explained it to me. There she is.
Yeah, see. Deuces. Michael, where are you in that process? Have you explained it to Rebecca? Have you explained it to anyone?
I've not gone through a contract verbally with Rebecca yet, but I'm familiar with it. But I think that would be good for me to go over it with her.
Oh, absolutely. You certainly want to practice it with your mentor prior to trying to explain it to a client for sure. We never practice in front of our clients.
Yeah.
Okay. And have you sat through this class on explaining a contract?
I've sat through a number of contracts classes. I don't know if I've been in through one that's like how to explain it to a client, but I've been through like contracts 1 to 4, contracts, stuff like that.
Right. Which is a requirement by TREC. The purpose of this class is I'm going to walk through the contract as to how I explain it to my clients, so that you can kind of see how that happens. There's going to be a few places that I stop and say something like, this is the reason why I do that, right? So it's really kind of more than just understanding the contract. It's more of how do you communicate the contract so that your client clearly understands that they are getting into a binding contract, so that they don't end up doing something stupid like going to closing and not being willing to give up keys.
I heard that recently happened.
That recently happened.
I heard. So, okay, that's good. Let me put out a contract then.
I now know the proper channels to go through. I did not know that previously. I now know the proper channels to go through if a seller decides to breach that portion of the contract.
How did that end up anyways?
There is a 3-day eviction process that can be filed with the county. You've got to post notice on their door and or send a certified letter. My buyer client chose to do both, but there was a post put on the door saying you've got 3 days. Once that is done and filed, obviously you take pictures of the door, right? You have your buyer client take pictures showing that posting was there. And once that has been done, then the buyer client has the right to call the constable out on the 3rd day to have the constable physically remove the seller and their belongings.
So they actually they closed on the house and they still wouldn't let them in. That's crazy.
So full story.
Okay.
When we went to the home at 11 a.m., we were scheduled to close to sign our closing documents at 4 p.m. We went to the home at 11 a.m. for our final walkthrough, and we already had been told by the listing agent, forewarning, the seller has stated they have a few more items in the home. Okay, great. We can handle that, right? It's not unusual for me to walk a home and there's maybe a box or a broom or cleaning items, stuff like that. Simple stuff typically. We walked into the home, the living room furniture and all the bedroom furniture was still in place. The kitchen, refrigerator and pantry had not been cleaned out.
Oh my God.
So I texted her and I said, there's more than just a little bit here. And I explained what I was seeing. And my buyer made the statement, it doesn't look like they've packed anything. They had taken everything off of the walls. That was done. And I told her, I said, look, all the shoes are in one bag on the living room table.
Oh,
Clearly
God.
they've packed something.
Yeah.
It's more of a facetious joke, but
Right.
um,
Yeah. They did pick one thing.
but so, and when we informed the listing agent that there was a little bit more than a little bit,
Right.
she responded, let me get in touch with them. And then she said, oh yes, they said they had to get a larger U-Haul. It'll be done before they sign at 3. Okay, great. 4 o'clock, we go in there and to sign, and the escrow agent walks in and says, we have a little issue.
Oh,
They
no.
wouldn't give me the keys. They said they still have a few more things to get out of the house. They're working on going and getting a storage unit now. They'll have it done before we finish. I texted the listing agent. Are they going to have it finished? Because now we're getting a different story. And she said, they assure me they will have it finished. They know the consequences. They said they'll have it finished. Okay, great. Obviously we get done. It's 5 o'clock now. Everything's closed. We get finished. Buyer drives to her new home. And no, stuff has not been cleaned out. Not a darn thing has been moved out. Her moving truck is now in place to move her furniture in the home.
Oh my God.
And the seller comes out and tells buyer, well, because we only have a Mexican passport, we weren't able to get a storage unit.
That's their problem. Because why?
Yeah. The buyer's dad is standing there and said, I'll be happy to go down to the storage unit and show them my driver's license. You can pay for it. And then in a month, I'll just cancel it.
Yeah.
Right. Give you 30 days.
Oh.
And I'll cancel the storage unit. I don't mind doing that.
Yeah.
And at that, they said, we're not going to talk to these bitches anymore. And they went inside and locked themselves in. Now, we had the key out of the lockbox. She could have opened up the door and started moving her crap. She could have, but the confrontation was not worth it for her safety. All this time, what I found out later from the listing agent is they had been telling the listing agent, they don't close on their house until 2 days ago, right? They were having a new home built and they were supposed to close on the 12th. As it turns out, wife didn't want to close and have to move her belongings twice. And all of this time, they kept telling their agent, we've got it figured out. We've got it. Don't worry. We've got it figured out.
No,
their plan was a bad one. They should have discussed their plan with their agent.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So they decided not to close on the house they were going to move into and just stay in the house they were in, but close on that one too?
It was a new build. They had no control over when it closed.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
what a mess.
when
I'm
you
sorry.
take
I
my
had to
new
do
build
that.
class, it was bad.
What a
Yeah.
mess.
So anyway, it wasn't a good plan. They should have discussed it with their agent. But
So
they
that's
ended up
nice.
moving their things out on Friday at noon rather than having the constable come help them Saturday at noon.
That's probably wise of them.
It was easier on them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it was certainly easier on my client.
Yeah.
So she was able to save Friday night in her house. She only had to pay for a hotel one night. And furthermore, after her moving truck drove off with all of her stuff in it, she sent me at 10 o'clock by the time all this was resolved, she sent me a text message and said, our closets were in that truck. I have to go to Walmart to buy my son something for school tomorrow.
Oh, no. Oh, no. What a mess.
It was a hot mess. It was a hot mess, but
It's over now, right?
she spoke to an attorney at 8 a.m. the following morning. Ernest was actually great. He was able to get us the name of an attorney who responded that night at 9 o'clock and said, tell your buyer to call me at 8 a.m. in the morning.
Nice.
So I had left messages with half a dozen attorneys. They all called me between 8:30 and 9:30, and I was able to tell them we've already had counsel. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. That sounds
yeah,
nice.
it was very, very, very quickly resolved.
Good.
Very grateful for that. But
Awesome.
you know, I put this is where that Facebook area thing, that's for the Austin. Evan, I hope that you're helping your agents find. Hopefully there's a similar one in the Waco area.
Yeah, I saw your post that actually the night that happened, I knew about it because I saw your post in area. But there is a couple Facebook pages in Waco, and I don't think they're quite as good maybe is that one, but yeah, we're involved in those. So
Good, good.
Hey, Lori, which group did you post that question to? Was it Austin
Area. It's the Austin area real estate. No, Austin real estate. Anyway, I'm not sure, but I can send you an invite,
Okay.
or Rebecca can send you an
I think
invite.
it's the Austin Real Estate Alliance group.
Oh, yeah, she told me about that. Okay, awesome.
Is it Alliance, Evan? Because Alliance is the LGBT community.
It's the Austin Real Estate Alliance, right?
Yeah, it is, I think.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Not to be confused with the Alliance itself, which is LGBTQ.
Yes. I'm familiar with that one too.
Okay, good. I've got a very, very good friend who's on the board for that one as well. So
Oh, really?
you might enjoy going to some of those, as well as the Young Professional Network.
Yeah, I
Those
would like to get involved with both of those.
Yeah, those are two very good ones to be involved with, just because it helps you create a real estate community for exact things like this. So
Yeah.
I had 2 or 3 other realtors reach out to me. I've been through the same thing. Of course, they reached out to me the following day and we already had it resolved. But nonetheless, there was a community of people to reach out and say, here was my experience. Here's how we got through it, right? So
Awesome.
having that community of realtors, when you come across something, obviously first you're going to reach out to your broker, but reaching out to your community of people as to, how are we going to, resolve this? Has anyone seen this? Has anyone been through this? Do you have a recommendation for XYZ, right?
Yeah.
So these real estate communities, I've heard agents before say, I don't bother going to any of that networking stuff because I'm not going to sell houses to them. No, you're going to sell houses with them and you're going to create relationships with them, right? When you can sit across from your buyer or seller looking at a contract that has an agent's name that you know very well, and you can tell them, I know that this is going to be a good deal. I know that I'm going to be able to work with this person well. I know them. You have just created, one, a very good working relationship, but way more trust from your client because you are internally connected, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So it is very, very important to have those connections and
Okay.
to attend some of those things. I know Kaylin and Madi went to the Waco committee fair, and they're both looking at joining YPN and social, I think,
Okay.
the social committees. So
Cool.
very, very important to have those connections and to get to know people. Maybe, Michael, you and I can schedule a time. I know a lot of people at Four Rivers. Maybe we can schedule a time to go down there, and maybe we need to start looking at, having a presence there. I'm wanting to talk to Renee Pretty,
Yeah.
and maybe kind of get more involved down there as well.
Yeah, we
Doing some
talk about this because I talked to
classes.
Renee and she said the same thing.
Yeah, do some classes and stuff like that. So you and I probably need to have those conversations and see where we can take that. But
Yes.
to get you, more involved with some of those, some of the realtors in your particular community
I would love that.
that
I would love that.
that you'll work with. Yeah, you'll love that.
Okay.
Okay. Let's dig into this contract because I've already yacked for 15 minutes and we haven't even touched the contract. This is, like I said, this is going to be an excellent explanation of how you would explain this to your client, okay? On the contract side. So let me, I need to share my screen first before I do that. Sorry. Just 1 minute. Does anybody have specific things that they want me to discuss, that they think maybe they've, in trying to explain it, that they've run across issues on while I'm getting these open? Ever, Rebecca, anything that you've seen from your mentees that you want to be sure I touch on today or spend extra time on?
I feel like we've touched on a few things like for the actual doing contracts. Like he's definitely filled out
Good.
like listing agreements. He's done actual contracts. he uh, presented a listing agreement, I think, to his mom and had her
Good.
sign it.
Nice.
So,
What'd mom say about your skills there, Michael?
She said it was really good. She did a good job.
Good.
She
Good,
said she
good,
was proud of
good.
me.
but yeah, no,
She's a little bit biased, maybe, but
Maybe.
but at the same time, she can hopefully, ask questions. It gives you the practice. Ultimately, it gives you the practice, and that's what we're after.
Yeah.
Okay. So when
Lori,
you're to sit down and explain this to your, yes, yes,
and I can pour it down right. The only thing I can think of is maybe mentioning all the different outs that the buyer has, like the tendencies that they
Yes.
could use if they ever got into it.
good, good. Yes, I absolutely will. Thank you. Okay, so we have gotten our buyer through the looking at homes, and now we're ready to present an offer, or we are presenting this offer to our client who has a listing and who has just received an offer, right? Either way. And I'm going to present this like from both ways. If we are talking to our buyer, this may be a time that we're asking them to complete services. You're going to explain that the broker is responsible for all of my activities as an agent, and I am acting on behalf of my broker. You're going to explain that our minimum duties and requirement is that we have to be honest and fair to all parties, but that we are protecting the interest of our own clients above our own. Going to explain both of those. And then you're going to say, in a real estate transaction, we can represent either the owner or the buyer, or there could be an intermediary where the broker represents the buyer and the owner. Most of the time there will be individual agents assigned to seller and buyer. In some cases, there will not be. Before that happens, we're going to sit down and have a long, hard discussion about that. We seldom ever see sub-agent. This would be when a person is not representing the buyer, but is bringing an offer to the seller. And then obviously, to avoid all disputes, we want everything in writing and clearly stated. And then you'll have your information, my information. And if you have a team lead, your team lead's information will also be on here. Okay. That is a quick overview of how you want to explain the information about brokerage services. Okay. Now let's look at the, come on, open up. The one to family contract, one to family residential contract, 1 to 4. Sorry. All right. Typically, I'm going to tell my client, this is the buyer and this is the seller, right? Easy breezy. If your client is an LLC or a trust, please know that we are going to need an LLC certificate of formation or trust formation documents showing who is allowed to sign on behalf of that entity. Okay, so that's something to know right here. If it's the other party, we don't need that information. Let your client know if that's the way that they want this deeded or titled at sale, then we're going to need that information. And the title company is also going to need that information. So we can go ahead and head it off at the pass right here whenever we're doing the contract. Okay. And then this is going to be the legal description. Does everyone know where to find the lot and block of a property whenever you're making an offer on it?
Yes.
I'll just answer that for myself.
Yes.
You can find this on the tax record. So you would go to the CAD for your tax, CAD.org. It's going to be Travis CAD, Waco CAD, WCAD for Williamson County, and for Hayes County, it's HayesCAD.org, right? You're in Bear County, Michael. I'm
Comal
guessing
County.
I'm sorry?
Comal County.
Comal County, okay. So, you'll have to look that up as to whether it's just CCAD or Comal CAD or whatever. But
Okay.
it'll be CAD is the County Appraisal District, and it typically ends with .org.
There's
Okay.
links in in CTXMLS. There's links for all the CADs at the bottom of my homepage or whatever, the landing
That's
screen.
correct. Yes, there is. Yes. So you want to, most of the time, what is in the MLS when you're representing the buyer is going to be correct. Sometimes it's not, right? I would also say when you are representing a seller and you receive an offer, just take a quick look at the CAD, or you've already entered the correct information into the MLS. Take a quick look to make sure that the buyer has this information correct. We don't want the wrong property being sold. And then when you get your title work, you want to just double check that that matches too. You'll have to list the county, the city, and then the address. This is going to be the 911 address. This is the 218 Morningside Circle, Hutto, Texas, right? This is the actual address of the property that you would use in your Google or whatever, also known as, right? Address, street, and zip. But this information, lot and block, is the information that's going to be on the survey. It's going to be in the title work. This is what narrows it down. The 911 address, this mailing address could be off sometimes. So you want to make sure that you've got the two of them correct, okay? Explain to your client, whether seller or buyer, these are the improvements that are expected to be with the house. Air conditioning units that are window units, if they are attached to the house and your buyer does not want them, you're going to put it right here in the seller to remove the following, right? Accessories also include swimming pool equipment. That includes the skimmer for the swimming pool. So if you're selling your client a home, or if your seller is, if the home that you're working with is a home that has a pool, that includes above ground pools. They are considered attached. So if that is something that your buyer wants to have removed, it's going to go down here in exclusions also. The skimmer is considered part of that equipment that goes with it. Accessories also include the fireplace screen, which we go over this in our listing agreement class too, but let's hit it here again. The fireplace screen and the fireplace poker, that all of that equipment, that is accessories. So if your seller has really, really fabulous stuff that they want to keep, make it very, very clear that they plan on keeping it, or have it removed from the home completely and packed up before showings. One or the other, or make it very, very clear that they want to keep it. It would go here if they intend to keep those items. Okay, I just listed one where I noticed all of that had been moved to the garage. Clearly they intend to keep all of that. Explain all of that. This is going to be your hardware. Again, in the listing part, we also discussed the fact, I said hardware, software. TV mounts are attachments that a lot of people aren't aware of. That is very correct, Rebecca. Thank you for that. The one thing we're seeing now is software and applications used to access maybe it's security devices, maybe it's the Ring device, sometimes even the AC. All of that has software now attached to it. If you're working luxury high end, you may even have window screens that are operated by remote that you're going to need to make sure the buyer is getting access to those items, and the seller takes those items off of their phone, off of any device that they have, tablet, phone, computer, any of that. So you're going to want to make sure that you discuss this very clearly with your client right out of the gate. And I had one show up to get one more thing out of the house after closing, and he still had the garage door opener. I'm like, no, you were supposed to give that to them at closing. So make sure that your client understands clearly what is expected from them regarding these items when they are signing the contract. Now, during the course of the contract, during the time we're under contract, anytime it comes up again, you're going to reiterate it. Don't forget, you're expected to do A, B, and C. right? So reiterate constantly, because when you're going over the contract, it's like them trying to drink water out of a fire hydrant. There's so much information coming at them, and they're making a very difficult decision, right? They're concentrated on that price, or their bottom line dollar, while you're trying to go over all of these other things with them on the contract. Okay. Sales price. This is the cash portion of the sale. If you have a cash buyer, the full amount of the purchase price is going to go here. If you are getting a loan, that portion is going to go here, and any part they're putting down, 20%, 3.5%, whatever that looks like, is going to go here. The total amount of your purchase price calculates automatically in this line. Okay. So if I put in here that my buyer is bringing, I'll show you how it works, $5,000 to closing. You see how it automatically put 5,000. So if it's a complete cash offer and I want to put 1 million, this is where it's going to boom right there. It automatically calculates it, right? And then if I go through and, whoops, I needed one more of those, and say we're going to have a loan for 200,000. I'm bringing 5. It's going to give me 2005 down here. See how that worked? Okay. If your property has a lease on it, there are going to be lease addendums required by the contract. If there is fixture leases, are going to be sometimes solar panels, sometimes satellite dishes, different things like that. Water softeners are sometimes leased. Some of those things could come up. So you may end up security systems. This brings out security systems. So if there is a fixture lease, that's a fixture lease, then you're going to attach the fixture lease addendum and make sure that everything has been disclosed. They're going to require a copy of the lease, et cetera, et cetera. This may affect your clients. If you're representing the buyer, it may affect the buyer's approval. So you want to make sure that that addendum goes to the mortgage lender after all of this is completed. Residential lease, if the home is being leased, has a tenant in it, then you should get a copy of everything that's listed on the residential lease addendum as well. So you'll check these boxes and make sure that you include those leases. Natural resource leases, I don't even know why they have this on the residential thing. Contract, because typically we only see this on farm and ranch property, but at any rate, if something were to come up and you have something like that, then those items would also need to be delivered. There's an oil and gas, for short we call it the oil and gas addendum. The name is much longer than that. Oil, gas, minerals, something like that. So if you ever have those issues come up, of course I'm available. Give me a shout and say, hey, I have a weird one, right? Earnest funding and termination option paragraph, you want to remind your buyer they have 3 days. The day that the contract is accepted is day 0. Tomorrow is day 1. So if my client is signing this today and day 3 would end on, say Thursday, day 3 would end on Sunday. Okay. Well, obviously the title company is not going to be open to receive that money. So it's going to move to Monday. If Monday happens to be July 4th and the title company is still not going to be open, then Tuesday is going to be the day that it's due. Does that make sense? So it's 3 days, but if the 3rd day falls on a holiday or a weekend, then it moves to the next business day. If you have any questions about this, when you are actually doing a contract, be sure to reach out to me or your mentor.
Did you say clear as mud, Lorrie?
I said clear as mud.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I'll often find that contracts or any legal document having been done by an attorney are typically clear as mud. Just a play on words for me. Do not put the escrow. I realize it says escrow agent here. I realize that. Do not put your favorite escrow agent in this blank. If that escrow agent moves to a different title company, this will stay with the title company. It will not follow that agent. It will not follow your favorite closer. It stays with the title company. Also, by putting your favorite closer's name in this blank, you are now making your favorite closer liable for everything in that title document. And she's not the one carrying insurance, or he is not the one carrying the insurance for it. It's the title company that carries that insurance. You are going to put that capital title right there. You're not going to put Sandy Steed, capital title. Does that make sense? And then you're going to put the address. It is inconvenient. Think of your clients. It is inconvenient for your clients to have to go to the next town over to sign documents because that's where your favorite closer is. This is also a place where it's about your client, not about you. Does that make sense? Yes, you have a good relationship and you know that your closer is a great closer. Does your closer travel? Will your closer go to the Capitol Title in Austin or the Capitol Title in Waco because this is a property being closed in Waco? Does that make sense? So when you're establishing relationships with your closer, know if your closer will travel to a different location to close your file. Okay. So that it's more convenient for your client. Generally, in the MLS, a seller's agent is going to put their favorite title company. If you find it's a title company with which you've had some issues in the past, you might request a change. My biggest beef is, and I used to be one, but I was really good at it. But my biggest issue, the place that I find we have the most issues, are these small attorneys' offices that are closing. I find we have a lot of issues with those during the contract as well as after the contract. So typically, if I see a law office come up as being the closing agent, I request a different one, and I generally request my favorite, Sandy at Capitol Title, right? I generally request that. So know that you, as the buyer's agent, you can come in and request a different one. There are times when, for one reason or another, typically in a trust, title has had to be open prior to closing. Sometimes in a foreclosure situation, title has already been opened so that that investor can make sure, if it's a flip, that investor has wanted to make sure that there were no other liens on the property prior to closing that needed to be addressed, because that investor needs to know that there's not a cloud on the title, that it's going to transfer cleanly to the next buyer, and they want to head that off at the pass rather than after, we're in a contract 14 days into it. Now we find out that there's this cloud that's going to take me 2 months to clear. So many times when an investor purchases a foreclosure for a flip like that, they're going to go ahead and open title with their favorite title company. Okay. So sometimes the seller's agent may come back to you as the buyer's agent and say, we've actually already opened title at this title company. It would be easier to close there. Right. So, that is a negotiable part, but know that it is something that could come up. So generally your earnest money is about 1% of the purchase price. So if your purchase price is $400, generally the selling agent is going to tell their seller, you can expect that about $4,000 to be put in for the earnest money, right? So a lot of times if it's less than that and you're the seller, you want to go back to the buyer's agent and talk to them a little bit, like, what's the thinking behind the lower amount, right? But you know, when you're the buyer's agent, you want to get that as low as possible so your client has less risk to that earnest money. And you can go back and talk to the seller. The seller's going to come back and negotiate. It is one of the negotiated terms in the contract. Okay. Additional earnest. Oh, wait, we haven't got there yet. Option fee is typically 0.1. So for the same $400,000 home, for 4,000 is the earnest money. 400 would typically be expected as the option fee. Now, we are in a buyer's market more or less in most of our areas. So a lot of these can be negotiated smaller. And I always go in and try, you know, $100 in a market like this, $150 for those 5 days. I try to get at half of that 0.1% that might be expected, right? Just to try to get the best deal as the buyer's agent for my client. As the seller's agent, right? I want that to be a higher amount because I want that buyer to have more skin in the game. Does this all make sense? If I'm a buyer's agent and I'm in a multiple offer situation, I want that to be as high as possible. If I know for a fact that my buyer loves this home and really wants, is in a position that they can put down even $1,000 because I'm in a multiple offer situation, I'll talk to my buyer about that. Hey, the stronger you can make this, let's do it. I have had situations where we put down the amount of earnest money for the option period to show the seller we're serious and we're just putting it all out there for you. They're going to have to come in with 3.5% down anyway. You know, why not put the 3.5% as earnest money if you're in an option period? They're going to have to put it down anyway. They've got to come up with that money at closing anyway, and then put the earnest money as, or the option money equal to what the earnest money would typically be. So there are ways to win those multiple offers without telling your client put $10,000 more than the house is valued, right? By doing this, you're showing the seller we are serious. Go ahead, Michael.
So if they were to do that, if they were to put like $4,000 as earnest money and $4,000 as termination option fee money, would if they got the contract, would both of those be applied to the purchase price?
They would be, yes, sir.
Okay.
They only lose their option money. This is important to explain to your clients. The option money will only be lost if we do not go to closing.
Okay.
But if we do go to closing, it will be credited back to the buyer at closing. And you let the seller know that too. This money is not in addition to your purchase price. This is going to be credited back to the buyer at closing. But it is yours to keep if the buyer backs out of this contract for any reason. And for the first however many number of days is here, the buyer has that right to back out. So as the seller, we want this to be as low as possible. As the buyer, we want this to be as long as possible, right? We want to give our buyer plenty of time to, let's say, get the septic inspected. Know how long it's going to take your inspector to get out there. When I am writing a contract for my buyer, I'm texting my inspector and I'm asking, how quick can you get out to Hutto? How quick can you get out to Georgetown? Wherever that property is located. Gerald was my last one. Wherever that property is located, I'm texting my inspector. How quick can you get out there? Because I want that to be in my, especially if I'm in a multiple offer situation, right? I want that to be as low as possible. And I am texting to find out, to make sure if I put 5 days in here for my inspector, I can actually get an inspector out there within that 5 days. Or within that 3 days. So typically we see this amount anywhere from 3 to 10 days. 3 is typically for a multiple offer situation where we're really trying to show the seller that we're serious. I've even seen 1 and 2 days. When I can get my inspector out there fast and I'm in a multiple offer, I'll put 1 or 2 days in here, as long as I know I can get my inspector out there. But I call and I ask my inspector. This is another good reason to have those relationships. I call my inspector and ask him to pencil me in. I typically text my inspector because he's on site and he won't answer my phone, but he'll text me back. Because he also has my number saved in his phone, just like I have his number saved in mine. A relationship. So it is good, especially you that are in my Buffini class. When you have those break breads on your list of things to do, make it with your title person. Make one of them to be with your inspector, your lender. You want to have these guys in your back pocket. You want them to have your phone number saved. You want to have that good relationship so they will answer your call at 6 o'clock at night. Okay. Clearly, maybe an attorney is also a good relationship to have, as recently proved. It was because of Ernest having such a good relationship with an attorney that we were able to get a response at 8 o'clock at night saying, have your buyer call me at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? So those relationships are important. The additional earnest money, we most of the time see this. Oh, your client's going to ask about earnest money and option fee. It's made payable to the escrow agent, the title company, either separately or in a combined single payment. Let them know that your favorite title company will reach out to them. Know what your favorite title company's processes are. Again, a good reason to go have that conversation with or have lunch with them. Write down all of your questions, right? And sit down and know how this process works for your favorite title company. And let them know that your favorite title company is going to be reaching out to them with instructions on how to make that payment. Okay. Also, one thing to think of with the option money, if or with the option period, if this contract is coming back to me at 10 o'clock at night and it needs one last initial from my client in order to make it official, I might send it to my client, but I'm going to recommend that my client not initial it until tomorrow morning. Because if my client initials it tonight at 10 o'clock, I've lost a day. Does that make sense? Because day one now is already tomorrow morning and we've lost today. If my client initials it tomorrow morning, then tomorrow morning is day 0 and I have an extra day. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm not seeing your faces because I'm looking at this. So
Yes.
Somebody stop me if I need to pause right there. Very, very important, kind of a strategic thing to do. Okay. Additional earnest money. Now, if you are going to be a backup contract because the house that your client is in love with has been went under contract yesterday morning and they're just now making their offer, but they are so in love with this home that they do want to be the backup. Or you've gotten word from the listing agent because you were smart and you called the listing agent before you did this contract. And you found out that, yeah, I don't know, they're not very strong. I'm really, really concerned that this contract may go through. We only accepted it because it was the only offer we had at the time, but I'm really worried about their financing. Or, I'm not sure that this person is going to be able to handle the amount or be interested in handling the amount of work that this home has. And your client decides based on this information, maybe we do want to put in a backup offer, right? You have talked to the listing agent, and you've gotten the information that you need for the backup offer addendum that needs to go. So you know when the option period ends, or when the finance period ends, so that you can put those dates on the backup offer addendum. You're going to come talk to us before you need to do one of those to make sure that you understand it clearly. But this earnest money that's typically when we see that come in. Occasionally, I see somebody that's a very hard negotiator will want to put in less money initially until the option fee and the inspections are completed, and then they'll want to put in additional earnest money, again, to show the seller that they're more serious. Sometimes I've seen that. We don't often see it used that way, but know that it can be used that way if that is something that your client is interested in doing, or if you feel that's a situation that would work well for your client. Most of the time we see this in a backup offer situation, so that once the contract becomes primary, then your client can come in with the additional escrow. So they can put up less initially, maybe $500 as earnest money initially, and then the other $3,500 in that $4,000 situation that we've already discussed. And then the other $3,500 would be put in after the contract becomes the primary contract. Okay, so that is something that can be that can also be done. So within this many days of the effective date, the backup contract becomes effective. The effective date of the backup contract is when that contract becomes the primary contract. The first contract has fallen out and we are now primary. So it gives your client 2 or 3 days after the effective date. Maybe you give them 5 days after the effective date of the new contract becoming primary for them to bring in that earnest money. Anybody have any questions about that part of it? Again, when you get in that situation, you're probably going to sit down and talk to one of us to make sure that that you're clear and you understand that process so that you can carry your client through it, whether it's the buyer or the seller. Okay. The escrow agent, which is the title company, receives the earnest money and the additional earnest money. And then this is where the buyer authorizes the escrow agent to go ahead and release the option fee to the seller at any time. That is the policy of the title company. So your buyer should understand that the seller is going to go ahead and get that money in many cases if that is the policy of the title company. Again, talk to your title company, know their policies. Some lenders require seeing that this money has cleared the bank before they will close. So once again, having that conversation, knowing your title company's policies on this and knowing that lender's policies on this is going to be important for your buyer, and important to explain to your seller too in some cases. Okay, this termination option is where you're going to put in the number of days. Be sure you don't skip paragraph B. We see that skipped quite often because this setup is new for many agents, right? You guys are learning this as like firsthand. This is the only contract you've ever known. Understand that your mentor and your mentors and I have seen other contracts, and this was not always the case. The option money had its own paragraph and many times was delivered directly to the seller. That not being the case now, make sure that the contract you're receiving, if it is, especially if it's coming from an older agent, it may not have this filled out. So look closely for this information. If this is not filled out, it is unclear to attorneys as to whether that means 0 days or unlimited days. So it will literally be a matter of perspective, right? So make sure there's a number in this termination option. This is where you're going to put your number of days for the option period. Okay. Failure to deliver timely earnest money means that the buyer is in default. Okay, and the seller does not have to. The seller can terminate the seller then has the option to terminate the contract. Failure to deliver option money means there isn't an option period, so the buyer is not able to back out, okay, for any reason. Time is of the essence, strict compliance. I let my clients know. Time is of the essence and strict compliance. I let my clients know. If there's a breach, I am going to be very clear to you as in multiple ways if that's what it takes to make sure you clearly understand that part. The title policy, again, title policy, I tell my buyers and sellers, is produced by the title company, which we'll put in here. Depending, know the price of the title so you can explain to your client how much that costs. In our $400,000 home, it's going to be about $1,500. Sometimes it can get as high as $2,000. So explain to your clients that it is set by the feds, like the insurance board is what sets this. It doesn't change based on the title company you use, but you can negotiate. If you check both of those boxes, then that would mean that the buyer and the seller are going to split that cost. Evan, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, on that previous paragraph about the option and earnest money, time is of the essence. I don't know if this changed, but is it still that, say you go under contract at 3 p.m., that's considered day 1, right, for your option and earnest?
No, ma'am. That's day 0.
Zero?
Tomorrow is day 1.
And the same for the option period?
Tomorrow is day one. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Which is why if my client needs to put their initials on something at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to go ahead and send them the document, but I'm going to advise them to sign it tomorrow.
Right, because that would be
tomorrow is day 0.
Got it. Okay.
And I explained to my clients how the counting of the days works right out of the gate, and I let them know right out of the gate, this is what I'm going to be recommending if we run into a situation like that.
Okay.
Let's see, moving on. Okay. The notice of termination must be given by 5 p.m. I go ahead and advise them of that, just in case we run across a situation where we receive termination at 5:01. We can't give it at 5:01. This is where I'm going to discuss with my client the title policy that is going to make sure that everything has been cleared and there are no additional monies owed on the property prior to the buyer taking possession. This amended or deleted from the title policy for encroachments, provisions, etc. This costs about $150, and we decide if that's going to be at the expense of the buyer or seller. This does not include minerals. It mostly covers the survey, shortages in the area, boundary lines, encroachments from maybe a fence or anything like that. The title company would then cover the new buyer's costs for having those items remedied, or if someone needed to be sued or anything like that. Most of the time in subdivisions, this does not come into play, and we're safe to put will not be amended. If you're in an older subdivision or one without an HOA, you might find it necessary to protect your client and put will be. It's only $100 or $150 in most cases, so it's worth the additional coverage for that $100 for what could be a very expensive legal battle with the neighbor because their fence needs to be moved, or an expensive cost of moving a fence, maybe that your client doesn't have. So explain to your client that it could be the expense of moving a fence in some cases. And you'll know the neighborhood, so you'll know how deep to go into this conversation with your client. The title commitment. The title company will have 20 days to send us this commitment saying that they will provide title insurance. When that comes in, we will take a look at it together and know if there are any items on the Schedule C that need to be addressed, or if we need to object to any of those items or the survey. We will look at it together. If the seller has a survey, we're going to give them a number of days after the effective date to provide that survey. If the survey is not acceptable by the lender or the title company, who do we want to cover the cost of a new survey? In a subdivision, that could cost about $150 to $300, depending on the area. The title company is the best person to reach out to for surveys because their surveyor tends to respond to them faster because they use them so much. For the number of days in this, I want to refer back to the number of days in the title or in the option fee, because that is more likely to help or hurt depending on which side of the board I'm on, right? If I am the seller. I want this to be as low as possible if I have the survey. I want this to be just a couple of days because I don't want to give the buyer any additional time to review. We're going to see down here in paragraph D that once the buyer receives these items, they have the right to object to anything on there. So this gives my buyer additional days basically of an option. So when I'm the seller, I want this to be just 1 or 2 days. When I'm the buyer, I might even, if I haven't received the survey yet, as a buyer, I might want this to be, I've got 5 days as my option fee, maybe a option period. Maybe I want this also to be 5 days because now I'm just actually extending my option for the survey by another 3 days. Does that make sense? And I'm going to have these discussions with my clients as I'm going through so that they completely understand what they are agreeing to. Here we're going to talk about whether if the buyer wants to obtain their own survey or if the seller wants to obtain or provide a survey. Then we're going to discuss the number of days that it's going to take. Talk to your title company again. Sometimes it takes 14 to 21 days for these surveys to come in. You're going to know that because you will have talked to your title company, and you're going to know whether or not your seller is in agreement with providing that. In this section, we don't need to put residential because this is a residential contract and a residential commitment is being provided. So we don't need to put residential. If I have a client that has a dog grooming business, I'm going to put dog grooming in here, right? Dog grooming needs to be allowed in that HOA or it's not going to work for my client. And then I typically, again, I give the number of days that correspond with when I'm representing the buyer, I give the number of days that correspond with. If we come across anything that needs to be cured, I explain to my clients, then we have to give as the buyer, we have to give the seller 5 days. And I explained to my seller, we would have 5 days for any objections that are provided here to cure that. Most of these do not pertain to our area. Some of these are going to pertain to Comal County. Obviously, we advise our clients to have a title policy issued so that they know that the title is clean. Obviously, seller, your property is in a property owner association, so there's going to be additional HOA addendum that we need to complete. You are obligated to provide the association documents to the seller, to the buyer, or buyer, we will be looking for these documents from the seller to come in. Once they come in, again, you have a number of days to object or back out of the contract that is covered on the HOA addendum. Statutory tax districts, if there's additional utility districts, water districts, anything like that, seller, you are required to provide that information to the buyer. Buyer, we're going to be looking for that. Tidewaters, okay, I'm not on the coast. Annexation, if we are just outside of town, then we have to provide information to our client explaining that this property could be annexed. The seller has to provide information saying that the property could potentially be annexed into the city. Certified area of utility service providers. Let's see, I'm in the Mansville Water District. That's going to fall under this, right? So some of those are private water districts, etc. The seller is required to provide notice. You will know whenever you're doing a property, whenever you're in the middle of something, if you have to, you can go through this and say, this one doesn't pertain to you because you're not in a utility, this property is not in a utility district, right? When you need to know those things and you're having issues looking them up, you can reach out to your mentor or me. In Williamson County, we have a lot of PIDs. I don't think there's a lot in Waco. I'm not sure if there are very many in the New Braunfels area. No, okay. So that's one that you would say, this doesn't pertain to us. We don't have those in our area. Transfer fees. This is going to be private transfer fees, whether it has to do with the water district, whether it has to do with the HOA, all of that information comes into this. Propane gas systems. There are some neighborhoods that have propane gas piped in, and there is a we have to disclose when there's going to be something from that propane gas company that or provider that we have to provide. Notice of water fluctuations. That's not something I have to worry about in my area, but Michael, you will probably have to worry about that in your area. I don't think anyone's allowed to live around Lake Waco. I think that's an LCRA, but if you are working with any lake properties or waterfront properties, you will need to provide a notice of water fluctuation. Any other required notices are going to be named right here, or all required notices are going to be named right here. So again, you'll know the area to be able to tell your clients, we have to do this notice, and this notice, and that will go in that blank. Property conditions. The seller, Mr. Seller, you must keep your utilities on for the full extent of the contract. Also, if there are any repairs that need to be done, they must be done by a professional or someone that, I'm looking for that paragraph, they must be done by a professional or someone that does that work professionally. A licensed professional or someone that does the work professionally. Okay. So let your seller know before we go into contract, if you need to take that little 10-cent piece of foam and wrap it around the pipe that goes from the house to the AC unit, do that now. If you need to replace a light bulb, do that now before we go into contract. Because once we go into contract, officially that stuff has to be done by a licensed professional. If you think that there are loose shingles on the roof that you want to tap back into place, go up on the roof and tap those back into place, because once you are under contract, you've got to hire a roofer to come back and tap those into place, and he's going to charge you way more than that little bitty roofing nail is going to cost you. Okay. I have this conversation with my sellers at this point. I also let my buyers know, unless you agree in writing, the seller is not allowed to go do any backdoor maintenance themselves. They have to hire a professional to come in and do that, and they're required to provide us the invoice once they do it. Buyer either has or has not received the notice. Mr. Seller, I want to make sure that the buyer has received the seller's disclosure prior to us agreeing to this, because otherwise you're giving the buyer an additional 7 days. Mr. Buyer, I am not going to ask for that seller's disclosure that they have not provided, because everything you need to know is going to be on the inspection report anyway. And this, if we don't receive it, it gives us an additional 7 days from the time we do receive it. If the Mr. Buyer, this property happens to have been a foreclosure or it is inherited property, therefore the seller is not required to provide us a property notice, a seller's disclosure notice. Okay. Notice of lead-based paint. Anything that was built prior to 1978 has to provide a lead-based paint addendum. The year 1978 is not required to provide a lead-based paint addendum. Acceptance of the property conditions. Yes, this means we're accepting it as is. We're not asking the seller to repair anything right now. This does not preclude us from the right to come back and ask for repairs after we do our inspection. Here's the paragraph that explains those, the completion of repairs that has to be done by a licensed professional or a professional that works in that field. And it explains that we are required to provide the invoice showing the scope of work before the closing date. This deals with lender required repairs. If the buyer's lender is going to come back and ask for certain repairs, if those repairs exceed 5%, the buyer is able to terminate. The seller is not, they don't even have to go back and ask the seller to do it. They can just terminate. In many cases, the buyer and seller want to discuss it. but the seller has, the buyer has the right to terminate based on that. Let's see, environmental matters. The buyer is advised of wetlands, toxic substance, or endangered species. Mr. Buyer, this is a Bastrop property, and there's this little bird that has to be protected. So this is the environmental, there's an environmental addendum that you're going to have to sign, notifying you of the fact that there is a bird that needs to be protected in your area. Okay. I'm not sure about, you'll have to, discuss with your mentors about your particular areas to see if that exists in your area. In my area, we have caves, we have salamanders, we have birds, all kinds of things that are being protected over here. Residential service contract. Mr. Seller, the buyer is coming in asking for $500, $600 for a residential service contract. This is going to cover the repair of stuff typically within the first 12 months. The buyer gets to choose this. Mr. Buyer, you want to ask the seller for a residential service contract. This is going to cover things that your insurance is not going to cover, like the water heater and the air conditioning unit, sometimes even the refrigerator. If you choose that policy, you will need to choose that policy and let the title company know which policy it is. We'll take care of that after inspections so that you have the inspection and the condition of the property fresh on your mind when we choose. Mr. Seller, the person purchasing your property is an agent. They have disclosed that here, right? You would explain that information. Mr. Seller, I am an agent and I am purchasing your property. Whatever that may be. If there is an agent that owns 10% or more of, or has 10% or more interest in the property, that could be in a trust, that could be in an LLC, whatever that is. Or if they're the trustee, this could be the what is it called when you're the person that handles the will, executor or executrix of a will. You're going to have to disclose it in here because you're a licensed agent. Okay. So something happens to mom and you're having to sell her house, you've got to disclose it right here. So we're going to go over whether there is or is not. Closing will happen on or before. Mr. Seller, this means that the buyer could be prepared to close prior to this closing date. Be prepared to move out. Be prepared to have that discussion. If objections have been made to the survey or the title policy, it could be within 7 days of those objections being cured, whichever day is later. So if those objections come into play, you're going to want to reiterate this paragraph. At closing, the seller is going to be required to provide all of the documentation that's shown to him, as well as show that there's no delinquent taxes, no additional liens. They also have to provide keys. It's a big deal. And then the buyer sign part of it, the buyer won't have possession until it is closed and funded, and the seller is going to present the property in its present condition, aside from ordinary wear and tear. We will do a walkthrough, hopefully the day of or moments before we go to the closing table. Mr. Buyer, I am going to do my very best to arrange that walkthrough to be on our way to the closing table so that we can see the condition of the property literally just before we sign. If it is not in good condition, we don't want to sign. I can tell you horror stories of that happening. If there is an option to have a temporary lease, either from the buyer or the seller. So if we need to, a situation where the home is empty and the buyer needs to move in, or the seller is not going to move out and wants to stay longer, we would need to have a temporary lease addendum in place to protect both parties. There's an addendum for that. The seller agrees to provide all smart device information to you, Mr. Buyer. Mr. Seller, you are going to provide access to all of those. I recommend, Mr. Seller, that you go ahead and change your device's passwords to match maybe the address of the house, so that you can pass that information along to the buyer without disclosing any of your, because we all tend to have passwords that kind of match all of our everything. So have this password to match the address of the house or something, so that it's easily remembered from the buyer, but also that you have cleared it from your devices. Know at closing that you will also need to delete it from your devices. You don't get to still check into the cameras and see what the new owner is doing with your property. Also has happened. So at the closing table, I'm going to ask you again about this, just to remind you, Mr. Seller. Let them know that. Special provisions, we seldom ever need to use this paragraph. I try not to. We would probably need to pay an attorney if we need anything to go into the special provisions paragraph. That is exactly how I explain that to my clients. Mr. Seller, this is not unusual. As I explained to you when we did our listing agreement, it is not unusual for us to see buyers in this market asking for some money contributed to them, anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000. It is absolutely normal. This buyer is coming in and asking you to contribute $3,000 toward their closing costs. They are not allowed to pay for the buy down under FHA and VA. They're wanting to buy down their interest rate, so they've come in and asked you for a little bit of that money. The buyer's expenses paid by the buyer include their appraisal fees, loan application, origination fees, credit reports. Mr. Buyer, these are all of your costs. There are certain things that are not allowed by the FHA or VA, such as buy downs. In those cases, we would need to ask the seller for those funds. If you're going to do a buy down, we'll need to talk to your lender to find out exactly what that cost is. Also, Mr. Buyer, if you want to ask the seller for some closing costs, we need to talk to your lender and bring them into that conversation, because there's only a certain amount that you can ask for. And it's going to affect your approval and the type of loan that you're receiving, especially, Mr. Buyer, if you're getting down payment assistance. You cannot go above a certain amount from seller's contributions. So, Mr. Buyer, we want to talk to your lender about that before we put an amount in this blank. So let's get your lender on the phone right now while we're sitting here, right? Shoot a text to the lender. Hey, can you call us? We're working on a contract together. Let's see, if the expense exceeds the amount for such expense paid by the party can terminate the contract. This has to do with the VA FHA loans. Mr. Buyer, I want you to understand prorations. When the settlement statement comes out, we covered this last week whenever we did settlement statements. When the settlement statement comes out, you will see that the seller is paying you this large portion of money, or Mr. Seller, you will see that you are paying the buyer this large portion of money, $4,000 or $5,000. Understand that that is the seller's portion of the taxes going to the buyer for the portion of the year that the seller owned the home. Seller gets the day of closing. The seller pays for the day of closing, not the buyer. And then, Mr. Buyer, you're also going to see that large portion is now going to your escrow fee if you have a lender. So you're going to see those monies transfer. Title companies have to show their work, so you're going to see exactly the path that money followed. It's not going to go straight from the seller into your escrow account. The title company is going to show the work. Casualty loss, Mr. Seller, if there's a fire, this buyer does not have to pay you for this house. Mr. Buyer, if there's a fire, you're able to terminate this contract. You are not obligated to purchase this house. If there's a major catastrophe and it's flooded, any of those types of issues. These are casualty losses, anything that the insurance company would cause casualty loss. Not necessarily act of God, but casualty. And the seller is permitted to contact their insurance carrier, and the buyer is permitted to receive those funds at closing. I will tell you, even though the buyer is permitted to receive those funds at closing, insurance carriers do not, your buyer may not be able to get coverage if there is a active claim on the seller's insurance. I'm telling you this because a lot of times it comes up with roofs. There was hail damage the week before closing. The seller wants to have that, or the roof needs to be replaced, so the seller opens a claim. If that claim takes 2 months, the buyer's insurance company will not activate. Therefore, the mortgage lender will not allow them to close. Be very, very clear with your clients on that. A lot of times, sellers want to say, oh, well, I can just contact, the buyer wants a new roof. I'll just contact my insurance company and get this closed. No, Mr. Seller, please do not open an insurance claim because it will affect closing. No, Mr. Buyer, we don't want to ask the seller to run that through their insurance claim, because if it takes 2 months for that insurance claim to clear, you're not going to be able to get insurance on this home, and the mortgage company won't allow you to close. Okay, so understand that that's a thing. Also, horror stories. Also, another thing to bring up here, if and it depends on the insurance company, if the roof is too far into its age, it may be considered by certain insurance companies to be non-insurable. Another important person to have in your back pocket, important relationship to have, is with an insurance person, right? We have an insurance person on our website. She is quick to answer. She will give you that answers to these questions. She also has a long list of insurance providers that she can go through, and knows her insurance providers. Like, this one won't cover it, past 5 years. This one will cover it up to 18 years. She knows those things about the roof. So, but it's also a very good thing whenever you look at your seller's disclosure, you can say, Mr. Seller, your disclosure statement says that this roof hasn't been replaced in 12 years. We may have an issue when it comes to the buyer. And talk to the buyer's agent about those things too. Make sure your insurance company is going to cover a 12-year-old roof. Let you talk to Sharon, because she can help you through that process to make sure your insurance company is going to cover this roof. We don't want to walk in the day of closing and not have insurance. Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller, if you default, I'm going to be jumping up like a banshee. I will let you know. You will hear from me. I will blow up your phone until you realize that you are defaulting. I will make sure you completely understand what your consequences are going to be if you're making a decision that is a default in this contract. If you and the buyer do not agree to something on this contract, you agree to go to mediation. The prevailing party, of course, will have their attorney's fees paid. Our escrow office is not a party to this contract. They are there just to make sure that the monies are in place, the monies get dispersed, and that they have all of the pieces of the contract that are needed for closing. That's all that they are there for. They have nothing, no skin in this game. They are a third party. And they are here to help us in the event of termination to get the earnest money back to the buyer, because Mr. Buyer, you have so many ways to get out of this contract. Mr. Seller, they are there to make sure you get the money if the buyer defaults. This demand has to do with buyer defaulting, and I'll help you through that if we get to that. God forbid. Representation. Everything we agree on with a buyer is going to be written. We are not going to spit and shake hands and hope that the seller is going to let us, that the buyer is going to let us take a little bit longer to get our stuff out. We're not going to do that. We're going to put agreements in place to make sure all of that stuff is taken care of. If you want the refrigerator, Mr. Buyer, we are going to make sure that we have it in writing from the seller that they are leaving that refrigerator, and they clearly understand that. Right? That's your non-realty addendum. Federal tax requirements. If the buyer is a foreign person, it would add additional, I'm sorry, if the seller is a foreign person, it would add additional costs to the buyer because the buyer would have some additional taxes to pay. So we want to be very, very clear if anyone is a foreign person. All notices will be given to the buyer at these addresses, to the seller at these addresses. Here's the phone number. You can put an address in there for in case there is something that has to be delivered by certified mail. Most of the time, we just put the email addresses in here. Completely your call on that. I love this new blank. Y'all are lucky because you have this blank. This also includes the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. Don't leave your client's information off of this contract. Be sure you put it in there. The title company needs to be able to contact your client directly in many cases. So make sure that that is there. Also, if the title company can't get in touch with you and they need to provide, pertinent information, they're going to need to provide it to your client. So make sure you put your client's information in there. And let your clients know. This is the address that the title company will need to send you information that may affect the closing of your property. So we want it to be an email that you check regularly. Don't give them your fake email. I have that conversation with my clients also. Mr. Buyer Seller, these are the addendums that we've discussed that pertain to your property. So you'll be seeing and signing these forms also, and we'll be reviewing them. You have the right to speak to an attorney about anything in this document that you do not understand. If there's something that you don't understand or you're unsure of, please take it to your attorney and review it with your attorney prior to signing it. Don't go into this not understanding it. I've done my best to explain it to you, but if there's more that you need an explanation of, please go talk to your attorney. And then once everyone has accepted every single term that we have just discussed, we are going to fill in the effective date. Again, remember, this date is going to be the date by which all things are calculated for this contract, and the effective date will be day 0. Then the buyer and seller sign. This page has absolutely nothing to do with the contract. It is just notifying you that I am going to receive 3% from the seller's agent to pay me for my time. That is included in your sales price. Mr. Seller, that will be deducted from your profits. This is the seller's agent. I'm sorry. Yeah, buyer's agent. This is the seller's agent, right? Mr. Seller, actually a buyer's agent from Classic Realty brought in the buyer. So you have an intermediary form to sign. We're going to check this box, and this is who the buyer's agent is. Notice again, we come across this word selling associate. That is the buyer's agent, right? It's just a different way to put it. This is the listing associate, all under a Classic Realty. So we'll have that discussion when we receive our contract. We're going to, this is the page where the title company will say, yes, we received the contract. Yes, we've received the earnest money and the option money, and this is the way in which we received it. And then the escrow agent signs as having to receive that. If there's any additional earnest money, it will go in this blank and will be dated as well. Any questions on this? Okay. Everybody feel like they can handle that? Good, because you're going to have to explain it to your mentor now. Yay! So your mentor may sit down with you and say, okay, I'm your buyer client. Or they may sit down and explain the contract to me. They may also have you come in and say, okay, now I'm the seller client. Explain it to me again. It will do you good to explain both sides of this. Sit down with your mom and say, okay, mom, you're my seller, right? I've already explained the listing agreement to you. Now I'm going to explain the contract because we just received an offer $50,000 over. Because I'm that good in a buyer's market. Hey, it's fun when you are practicing these to throw in all the crazy circumstances that you can think of. And your mentor or the person you're explaining, like tell your mom when you're explaining this to her, ask me all the crazy questions, mama. Ask me all the crazy questions, right? Because you never know what questions you get. And your client may at some point go, okay, this may sound like a stupid question. I tell my clients at the get-go, ask me all your stupid questions. I'm here for the stupid questions because none of them are really stupid, because you need to understand this very clearly. I want you to understand what you're doing. This is probably the biggest transaction of your life. When in your life have you ever received $400,000 in one setting? Oh, never. This is a big deal. You need to understand what you're getting into. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you for your patience. We went a little bit over. It was for good reason, but because we were talking about a particular incident at the very beginning, probably that.
Distracted you again. I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right. Let us know if you have any questions. Your mentors are very available for you and always there for you. So let me know if you have any questions. And then Michael, you and I will be getting together on New Bronzeville specific stuff to see what I said it wrong. I know I did. I always do. Michael used to get on to me.
New Bronzeville.
And I just called you Michael. I just called him Michael. I called you Mitchell the other day. My Mitchell was my other agent who I raised to be a broker, and now he has his own brokerage down there.
Is that the commercial guy you were telling me about?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
It is.
I remember him.
I think I sent you his information, right?
Not yet. Still waiting on it.
Well, let me do that right now.
Thank you, Lorrie.
All right. Absolutely. You guys let me know if you need anything else, okay?
Okay, we'll do.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye.